right, we are going to continue again. We have just got a couple more chapters in our book, The Mouse and the Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary. So we're going to be reading chapter 12, but let's do a quick little review on chapter 11. Chapter 11 was called The Search. This is where Ralph is going around searching for the Tylenol, because if you remember from previous chapters, that Keith is now sick. He's got this fever, and his parents have gone everywhere, and they've been looking for Tylenol and can't find any. So Ralph takes it upon himself against the wishes of his family. They don't want him to go out there because Tylenol is what ended up killing his father, if you remember that too. So they don't want him to go, but he says, I'm leaving, I'm done, I'm not even gonna argue with you anymore, like I'm gone. So he goes out and he looks in all the rooms. When he gets into the very last room on this hall, he gets trapped by a glass cup. Okay, so he's under this glass cup. He's got these two teachers, coincidentally, looking at him under this glass cup, trying to decide what they should do with him because they don't want to hurt him. And they're like, oh, my kindergarten class would love this, to have this pet. And then they're like, well, it's a really long way. I don't know if he'd survive. So they decide not to do that. And Ralph's like, well, I don't know what they're going to do with me. And they cannot understand him. He's starts to yell and scream and say all this stuff to him. Like, you can't do this. I'm trying to save somebody. And all they say that they hear is, oh, look, he's squeaking. Isn't that so cute? They just don't get it. In the end, they decide that they don't want to hurt him, but they can't let him, just roam around because of, they don't, want him to get hurt by the maids or, eat poison. So they think, okay, well, the best thing for him to do is go outside. And so they literally just open the window and boop, bye, and drop him. So chapter 12 is called An Errand of Mercy. Owls, thought Ralph, as he clung to the Virginia creeper and filled his lungs with the cool night air that was such a relief after the stuffy drinking glass. I've always wanted to climb down this vine and explore the ground floor, he reminded himself grimly, and now I have to. Ralph had never been outdoors beneath the moon and the stars. He felt small and frightened and alone. Slowly, paw over paw, he worked his way along the shoots and tendrils. An owl, uncomfortably close in a pine tree, hooted, and Ralph huddled shivering in the shadow of a leaf, aware that he was losing precious seconds. A night wind rattled the windows, and the owl glided off across the parking lot. Ralph inched his way down the vine. It was a long, winding route filled with detours towards the ground floor window, which, to Ralph's relief, was open. Upon reaching the sill, Ralph leaped to the floor of the room in which 3 young men of college age were sleeping, 2 in beds and 1 in a sleeping bag on the floor. An aspirin. I must find an aspirin, thought Ralph, darting under the bed. He bumped into a dust mouse, which startled him, but he did not find an aspirin. He was in such a hurry, he ran right over the man in the sleeping bag instead of taking the time to go around. There under the dresser, gleaming at a shaft of moonlight, he saw a round white pill. He went closer. Yes, it was really an aspirin tablet at last. Ralph was positive it was an aspirin and not some other pill because it had a letter stamped on it. Ralph could not read the letters, but he knew they stood for aspirin. He had been warned about them often enough. Now all Ralph had to do was figure out how to get the pill upstairs to room 215. Telling himself that in spite of all that had happened that night, it could not be much past 1 o'clock in the morning, Ralph had pushed and half rolled the aspirin around the man in the sleeping bag to the door. He shoved it under the door and with great difficulty squeezed himself under. The first floor carpet was thicker and of better quality than that of the second floor. Ralph worked his way with the aspirin down the hall to the lobby where the night clerk was sleeping on a couch. The glassy eyes of deer heads mounted on the knotty pine walls seemed to stare at Ralph. So did the giant eye of the television set. Slowly he moved his precious load across the lobby to the stairs, and there he stopped. How could he manage to get this aspirin up those stairs? He picked it up and tried lifting it, even though he knew he could not reach the first step with it. The night clerk tossed on the couch and made a gobbling, snorting noise. Ralph dropped the aspirin in a panic and looked wildly about for a hiding place. With one terrified leap, he dived under the grandfather clock between the elevator and the stairs. It was immediately plain from the dust that no one had ever cleaned under that clock. This is a grandfather clock, like a really tall, slim clock. struggled to control a sneeze. Above him, the works of the clock began to make grinding noises. Achoo! The sneeze could not be held back. Bong! The clock struck 1:30, forcing Ralph to clap his hands over his ears. How his famous ancestors, the one that ran up the clock, hickory-dickory-dock, stood the racket, he did not know. Peeking out, Ralph discovered the night clerk had slept soundly through the din, so he ventured out from the clock to continue his struggle with the aspirin tablet. Since carrying the pill up the stairs was impossible, Ralph had to find another way. The elevator? Ridiculous. A mouse could not run an elevator. Then, quite unexpectedly, a whole plan of action popped into his head, and Ralph had a genuine inspiration. First, he rolled the aspirin to a safe place behind the ashtray stand beside the elevator. Then, empty-pawed, he climbed the stairs to the second floor and ran down the hall to room 215, where he squeezed back under the door. Keith was still half awake, his eyes glinting with fever under his heavy lids. "Psst," said Ralph. "Psst, psst. I found an aspirin for you." Murmured Keith. "An aspirin tablet. I found an aspirin." Where is it?" Keith was more awake now. "Down on the first floor." "Oh." Keith was obviously disappointed. "Now wait. I can get it up here, but I have to have some help. You have to let me take your sports car." "No, you're too young," mumbled Keith. "I am not!" And it was true that Ralph felt very much older than he had when he lost the motorcycle. "Come on, you need that aspirin, don't you?" "No, you already lost my motorcycle." "Oh, come on." Ralph was growing more impatient as he felt the night slipping by. "If you won't let me take the sports car, will you let me take the ambulance?" I guess so." Keith did not feel equal to arguing with a determined mouse. He picked up his ambulance from bedside table and set it on the floor. "Here." "One more thing," said Ralph anxiously. "Do you think you could manage to open the door for me? I know you feel terrible, but it's the last thing I'll ask. Honest, I promise I'll have the aspirin up here in no time." Keith sighed, but he slid his feet from under the sheet and, hanging on the bedside table, reached over and opened the door. Ralph was already seated in the white ambulance with the red cross painted on the side. Wee, 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 wee! He took the corner into the hall on two wheels and sped down the bare floor between the wall and the carpet until he came to room 211. Here he slowed down and then went, wee, 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 good and loud. This carried him, as he had planned, to the elevator. It was a crucial moment. Now he would find out if this plan was going to work. The little dog in room 215 began to whimper and then to bark, just as Ralph had planned. In a moment, the door opened and the man stumbled out with a little terrier in his arms. "Oh, all right," he grumbled. "I'll walk you. Shh, will ya?" Ralph waited, his paws tense on the steering wheel. The man walked groggily to the closed elevator door where he managed, in spite of the wriggling dog in his arms, to push the button, and soon the elevator door slid open. Ralph knew that timing was important. The man entered the elevator, the dog barked. "Wee, wee," Ralph said, hard enough and fast enough to shoot the ambulance at great speed across the yawning crack between the floor and the floor of the elevator before the man turned around. As the dog's owner turned, Ralph steered skillfully around his feet and parked the ambulance right behind him. The man pressed the button, the doors closed, and the elevator actually began to descend. "Do you know what you are?" the man sleepily asked the dog. "You are a nuisance, that's what you are. A four-footed, hair-covered nuisance." The dog ignored his master. "Master, I know you're down there," he yapped at Ralph. "If I could just get down, I would get you." The dog was talking to Ralph. Ralph did not answer. He was taking no chances. He waited quietly inside his ambulance until the man had carried the dog out before he drove out of the elevator. He jumped out of the ambulance, opened the rear door, seized the precious aspirin, and booted it inside. Slamming the doors, he ran around and jumped into the driver's seat. There was not an instant to lose. Woo, wee, wee, wee! The ambulance moved toward the open elevator, but unfortunately by this time, Ralph was slightly out of breath. The front wheels of the ambulance caught in the crack between the floor of the lobby and the floor of the elevator, and the ambulance was stuck. "Oh no," thought Ralph, "not now. I can't fail now." "Wee, wee!" he managed to gasp. The wheels spun, but the ambulance did not move. Ralph jumped out, put his shoulder to the rear of the vehicle, and pushed with all his strength. But nothing happened, and in a moment the man would be returning with his dog. Desperate, Ralph climbed back into the ambulance, took a breath so deep his lungs would surely burst. Wee, wee, wee! He made the sound hard and fast and really high-pitched. The wheels spun. The ambulance moved slowly at first, and then as the tires got a grip on the floor of the elevator, it shot out of the crack and across the elevator and hit the rear wall with a bump. Ralph collapsed over the steering wheel, limp with relief just as the man came back through the lobby with his dog. I guess some boy lost his toy ambulance, muttered the man, more awake now as he stepped in and pressed the button. Toy? Thought Ralph indignantly. This ambulance is carrying medical supplies to the sick. Boy, my foot, yapped the terrier. It's that dastardly mouse. Let me down and I'll get him. Ralph did not try to answer. He was saving all of his breath now to get the ambulance across the crack once more. The man slapped the dog lightly on the nose and said, Be quiet. I took you outside, didn't I? Fortunately, the elevator door stayed open behind the man as he walked out, so Ralph had no trouble driving the ambulance out and down the hall to room 215. The door had blown shut, but he didn't care. He jumped out of the ambulance and ran around to the back where he unloaded the aspirin, shoved it under the bedroom door, and squeezed in right after. Hey, Keith, I've got it! Ralph was filled with triumph. I've got your aspirin! Okay. Let's see what happens next, and that will be the end. One more chapter. Later, guys.